All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome to everyone who has joined us. Some of you, this is just one in a series of webinars that you've attended, and so thank you for coming back. We are going to be talking about creating a culture that counts, in this case, very much focused on the elements of an inclusion culture that make your company great. So for those of you who have already attended, and by the way, I'll be switching to full slideshow mode in a second. There's a method to my madness here, staying with this particular screen. I don't want to take too much time talking about my background because many of you already know me. But for those of you who don't, just know that I came to this space from the law. So I started actually litigating these kinds of cases, employment discrimination cases. And I soon realized that I was more part of the problem than the solution, actually, because litigation never solves anything. I had a passion for business and a passion for people with diversity, and always wanted to be able to demonstrate that the more diverse workforce we have and the more those people feel that they belong, the better off our workplaces are, not only because they become better places to work, but more significantly, the business results associated with having diverse employees who feel that they belong. That business case is just over the top. When I first started this work, there wasn't much proof of that, and now the proof is just astounding. I've been endorsed by Marshall Goldsmith as the world's leader in diversity and inclusion. For those of you who are on the line who are diversity and inclusion professionals, we're all leading the way. If you're on this call, it's because you want to be at the top of your game. You want to be involved in next practices and not just historic best practices that frankly have not worked. And so let's consider ourselves all leaders and all striving towards the same purpose. In terms of my role at Lead Inclusively, we are first and foremost a consulting firm. So we are here to help you in every respect, from those of you who are just at the beginning of your journey, establishing the business case, getting the kind of resources that you need, both financially and otherwise, straight through trying to craft your diversity and inclusion strategy, the metrics associated with that, your goals, your vision, and then making that a reality through programs that really matter. On top of that, we are on a journey of creating technological solutions to support those efforts. So for those of you who are on the line from global organizations or from national organizations that are in multiple different locations, you know that you really do need technology to support and sustain the results of what you're trying to accomplish. And I can share a little bit more of that with you as we move on. Now, here's the thing. I want to start with, why do we even care about an inclusion culture at all? But if I spend all my time talking about that, rather than assuming that the fact that you're on this webinar means that you do care and that you know the business case for this, then we'll never get to the substance and meat of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of talking about moving and transforming towards an inclusion culture. So this is why I didn't share my screen as a slideshow, because I want to toggle to just to show you what we're going to do for you. We have a business case deck that I see that with my little hyphen, I took the S out of business. We have created a business case deck, and it is extensive. And you will see when you get it, and if you are on this webinar, you will receive this. Just know this. Just moving down a little bit, you are going to get the business case for gender inclusion, the business case for racial and ethnic inclusion, generational inclusion, and these items are all cited for you so that you can go visit them on your own time. But just know that we no longer have to guess about why we want an inclusion culture, to be quite honest with you. The studies are credible, the statistics are overwhelming, that when we have the right mix of people in the workplace, which means diversity of people, diversity of ideation and background that comes from that. We get increased innovation, we get increased sales, moving down to racial and ethnic inclusion. We get some of the highest levels of revenue with racial diversity, and some of the lowest levels without it. The same with generational inclusion, et cetera. So just know that we're starting with the assumption that you know just how important it is to move to an inclusion culture, but we are going to support you by sending this deck so that you can be more empowered to get the kind of resources you need to make this a reality, okay? You'll also get our case studies as well. This is not just some elusive thing that's happening within the walls of Deloitte or McKinsey. We are achieving these results for our clients every day. And what that looks like is being able to increase representation, but also to increase retention and advancement through inclusion, right? Through an inclusion strategy that is effective and sustainable. So that's why we're here on this call. So I will now switch back to this other screen. By the way, it was very hard to find a gender neutral briefcase to symbolize the business case here. So before we get into our agenda, I just wanted to share with you a few definitions. And quite frankly, and let me just get this slideshow to cooperate. Give me 1 second. Come on now, I know you can do it. Okay. All right then. It doesn't want to go into slideshow mode. So I am going to assume that that this screen is big enough for you to see, frankly, because I don't think I have a choice. There you go. These definitions that I have here for you, they are not the right definitions. There is no right or wrong definition for organizational culture, for what constitutes a toxic culture, etc. But these are our definitions at Lead Inclusively. So in terms of culture, we are talking about the personality of the culture, but more importantly, the entire expectations that are created and the work atmosphere that is created as well. In terms of, excuse me 1 second. Matt, can I ask for your help, please? Because I just want to get rid of this screen on the right here because it's preventing me from seeing the whole screen because of the problems with going to slide share mode. And if I press X here, it says quit, and I definitely don't want to quit. So thank you so much. Nothing like having technological assistance when you need it. Okay. So when I talk about a toxic culture, that in our definition is one in which the external branding and the internal branding simply don't match. So most of our organizations out there have a mission, a vision, and values statement. And most of those include all these great things like integrity and trust, and often some element of inclusion, even if it's not expressed in just that way. The toxicity develops when the actual branding differs from that mission, vision, and values. So in other words, all of the actual statements are just wonderful, but the way that the way the company actually exists, the way people interact with each other, do not match. That is our definition of a toxic culture. A healthy culture, on the other hand, is one in which the external branding and internal branding actually match, and above and beyond that are based on these core human values that connect us. So not just the reasons for being. In other words, you are a biotech company that is producing devices, medical devices, or you are a tech company, or and your purpose is to create these wonderful apps. but which would be the economic or revenue reason for being, but that the culture is actually based on these core human values that are important to all of us and are the reasons that we show up in a way that is invested in the company as opposed to just picking up a paycheck. And lastly, what is the definition of an inclusive culture, which is what we are striving towards? And that is basically that as a core element of organizational health, that diversity is not only acknowledged, it's celebrated, that the people within the organization, all people, are empowered, and that the organization really does understand that those differences, the very differences themselves, are that which fuels ideation and therefore innovation, as well as reducing risk, because when you have different voices, they see things differently, and they can also protect the organization from a risk perspective. So let's move on now just to talk about our agenda for today, so that we're all on the same page. We are going to be addressing what the actual challenge is. For those of you who are on the journey of transforming your organizations or being part of that transformation, you know that just how difficult it is, and you probably are here because you know what the challenges are, but we'll set the stage for that. We will talk to you about our methodology for making that change. We will identify the key inclusive behaviors that transform and sustain an inclusive culture. And we're going to talk to you about some solutions, in particular, not just, individual discrete solutions, but the entire concept of making sure that once you have taken that journey towards an inclusive culture, that you can keep that sticky and sustainable throughout. Now, just in terms of a few quick logistics, you do have a chat bar, you may notice. I removed my little menu here, so I don't see it on my screen, but you should see it on yours. You'll see chat, you'll see questions. Elizabeth Lane on our team. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi there, good morning, everyone.
Is there, and she's curating that. So you have the option to send your questions, comments, or what have you to her individually if you prefer to stay anonymous. If you don't care about that, you can send it to everyone. Either way, during the, you can send her chats or questions at any time, but there'll be discrete points in time throughout the program that she will curate those, and I will answer them intermittently as time allows. And then, of course, you can always reach out to us personally to get a further conversation. So no problem along those lines. And you'll also, there'll be just quick polls that we'll be doing. In fact, we'll do one right now just so that you can get used to it. Elizabeth will be launching those polls. And, it's important that you participate from the point of view that we will be able to send you sort of curated information if you like, based on your responses. We'll know in the future what people are really focused on, what's important to you. And so, Elizabeth, would you enable that poll, please, the very first poll, so that people can sort of try that and test it out, and then we can report on the results?
We've got people voting right now. We'll wait for a moment before closing that poll and we can move on.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. This is just, you'll see that these polls are not in any way intrusive. They're just meant to really give us a strong idea of how to serve the majority of the people on this call. Remember, there are over 200 people on this call, and you're all at various different stages of your journey. You all have different priorities, different ways of looking at things, and it really helps us to curate how we serve you if we have a little bit better feel for what you're experiencing.
All right, thank you everyone for participating. We are closing the poll now, and Denise, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, so Elizabeth, since we've closed the poll, are we going to be reporting on the results now?
Sure, if you'd like. We have
In terms of, percentages, just anonymously, obviously.
exactly.
Mhm.
So everyone can see here, the results are that 86% say that employees feeling included is vital to company performance. So there's a lot of agreement on that.
Yep.
My company regularly supports inclusion initiatives. We're right around 57% for that, so about half. And then only 29%, my company effectively makes all employees feel included.
Okay, that's vital information. Thank you. Thank you for contributing. For those of you who, who did, thank you very much. That gives me a really good feel for things. And by the way, my technology decided that it would give you a slideshow. So hopefully that looks a little bit better now than it did before. Okay, so let's start with the whole concept of the challenge. So transforming an organizational culture, what's so challenging about that? Well, what's challenging about that is just what we said before. I use the term internal, external. It's also the term formal and informal culture. The formal culture says respectful, inclusive, innovative, high trust, service, etc. But actually the informal culture does not align with that. The second challenge, and I know that it sounds really perfunctory, but organizational change is difficult, right? Particularly in larger organizations. It's like, the Titanic. You're moving, you're guiding, you're trying to, move this huge ship just a little bit over to the right, and the effort that it takes is just Herculean. Feels like you're just pushing a boulder uphill, and then if you take your eye off the ball off the boulder for 2 seconds, it's going to just come back and slam you. And last, change, even when it is successful, if it's not sustainable, it just simply doesn't last. It's that simple. And so we can't just focus on the transformation. We have to focus on the stickiness and sustainability of that as well. So, what is that all about? Well, as you know, organizational culture is derived from our leadership. And from their actual actions. So not just what they say, at a town hall or when they come and visit business units or what they're saying on YouTube or externally, but what they are actually doing for real in their day-to-day leadership actions. So many, even most at this particular point, they know what unconscious bias is. Some of them even know what their inherent biases are. They've taken maybe an unconscious bias awareness training, and they actually have had a moment to reflect on what their biases are, and they may be aware of what those are. Some of them might even be on the path of mitigating their behavior through awareness. So, for example, what that would look like for me is, and people who know me well know this, is that I've had like this aversion to tattoos my whole life. Stop, what are you doing? It's permanent. And then, I don't know. I just don't care for them. And so I know that. And so if I am interviewing someone and they have tattoos, I take a deep breath, I pause, I interrupt my own inherent bias, and I say, you listen, Denise, to this human being who has a lot to offer you, and you make any sort of judgments or go forward decisions based on who they are as a human being, and you're going to ignore that tattoo that you don't like. And that's great because I have that awareness. But moving on from that awareness, most leaders actually don't know what inclusive behaviors are. They don't know what inclusion looks like. They don't know how to apply it. They don't know how to practice those skills. Their awareness has been elevated, but we've given them no place to go because we haven't given them any tools regarding inclusive behaviors. Now, notice how I'm giving the leader the benefit of the doubt here. And the reason for that is that we can't really focus too much on people who are not going to be changed, who are simply adverse to this, have such severe prejudice that they're not going to move forward. We just need to hope that based on the fact that they're not showing up the way they need to show up, that eventually the organization will figure out that it's not a match. But what we're looking for is to move the neutral leader to a champion, and the champion to a change agent, if that makes sense. And I'm more than willing to hear comments and questions on this issue. Remember, we're sharing with you our opinions in terms of the way that we have served, mostly Fortune 1000 companies. And part of that is really focusing on what we can change, and knowing our limitations in terms of what we may not be able to change. Now, we are under the supposition that most leaders are well-meaning, but look at what they're dealing with on a daily basis, right? They are dealing with all the pre-work pressures of, oftentimes of significant others and families, young children, etc. The second that they wake up in the morning, and probably this 7 a.m. is optimistic. If you're like me, you've been up till since 6 a.m. or even earlier, because you're on top of that trying to work in a workout so that you can keep healthy and keep sane. Some of us are commuting in traffic or public transportation. We start our day with some sort of a meeting. There are going to be continuous things throughout the day. We have noon as lunch, which frankly, some of us don't get to have lunch. We're sitting at our desk and trying to get done everything that we couldn't get done with our back-to-back meetings. We're dealing with strategy issues, performance evaluations. Now, obviously, I'm encapsulating, a day. It's not that leaders are dealing with these kinds of issues every day, but if they're not dealing with these issues, they're dealing with other issues, and they're all directly related to whatever their performance goals or KPIs are, right? So they have competing priorities. They're busy. What time do they have really to reflect on their inclusive behaviors, or on how they show up as a leader as it relates to inclusion? So we have to assume positive intent, but we have to accept that either they don't have the tools in lots of cases, or when they do have the tools, it's inconsistently applied because they don't have the means by which to reinforce that throughout their day. And based on that knowledge of the leaders that have been in our lives for our clients in enterprise, that really governs everything we do. All of our consulting and all of our technology revolves around the reality of this, what you're seeing here on the screen, that we are engaging in a life that is back-to-back, and that many of us are well-meaning but need assistance. And that's where you come in, and that's where we come in as well to support you. So what happens under those circumstances that I've described? If you don't have inclusion being infused into the workplace by these leaders, you have employees who are basically unengaged. They and especially, by the way, if you're hearing we are an inclusive culture and all this, and then leaders are not behaving that way, actually it's worse than not even being articulating those values at all, because there's a tremendous amount of frustration that exists and disillusionment. And what happens is these diverse people, so women, people of color, and others, basically end up not staying, and that creates kind of a toxic result in the wrong direction. So anti-transformation, but in the wrong direction, in the sense that diverse employees leave. Glassdoor scores and comments reflect that. The real message in the overall business community is, ooh, don't work there. It's not a friendly place for women, for people of color, etc. And therefore, the organization is actually moving in the wrong direction. So I'm going to stop now, and Elizabeth, for the questions or comments that have come in, can you curate them? And I realize that you won't be able to address all of them, but even just one or two of the top ones so that people feel heard, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, you know what? Some of the questions would be better held to continue this next section. I think you'll answer some of them. So let's go on and finish this section and then get to the ones that are outstanding.
Okay, good. I know that you're the one that keeps me honest in terms of time and respecting people's time in the event that I get carried away. So that's fine, no problem. And Elizabeth, to the extent that we don't have time to answer all the questions, just remind me to reiterate that we're here to do that by email or otherwise. You can see on your screen info@leadinclusively.com. We'll get to Elizabeth, who will field it to whoever, including me, if that's what you need. So thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so let's talk a little bit about inclusion transformation methodology, right? Because if we take an ad hoc approach to this and we're not strategic and we think that we can make a transformation through, random activity that is well-meaning but not strategic, we're going to fail, right? We can't do a random ERG and then do another random, people of color day, or even have phenomenal guest speakers and think that in some way is going to be a transformation. So the methodology that we use is very specific, and I highly encourage you to consider it and to have an additional conversation with us on this if it's not crystal clear. And we call it the FSM, Lead Inclusively FSM methodology, which starts with focusing on the right thing, strategizing for success, and measuring what matters. And we're going to be getting into each of these three items in some detail so that you have an idea of what we're talking about. The first is focusing on the right thing, right? We have so much to focus on our journey to make our organizations more of an inclusion experience, that we can only focus on so many things. And the three areas that we have found to be most impactful, one of which we're obviously speaking about today, are talent, culture, and risk. Talent in the sense that we need to not only recruit more diverse people, and that's of course the diversity part of diversity and inclusion, but we need to be able to focus on retention and advancement of key diverse talent. That's the inclusion component of that. We need to be able to focus on how those people feel when they get there. And we need to really look at our employee engagement scores. Have an employee engagement survey and be in a position to dissect that data according to gender, race, and other areas, so that we can see whether employees are being adversely impacted according to certain demographics. Now, there are things that we can't measure in that way, like you're not going to see cognitive diversity show up because you can't cut the data for it. And for those of you who attended our Metrics That Matter webinar, some of the tips and tricks for metrics as well. In terms of culture, we need to focus on what tools do we have to augment diverse ideation, to teach and reinforce inclusive behaviors, to support and sustain the capacity for that transformation. And on the risk side, we do, of course, want to reduce employee complaints and attrition and protect our brand by not having these horrific lawsuits, et cetera. But the risk part of this actually comes from focusing on the talent and the culture piece of that. If you do, you're going to find a reduction in risk anyway. In strategizing for success, what do we mean by that? I mentioned an ad hoc approach. The strategic approach is to assess so that you know what the gaps are, both from an organizational culture point of view as well as from a leadership behaviors point of view. Educate on the right things. So that can't be just raising the level of awareness of unconscious bias, the way I mentioned before. It has to be upskilling your leaders so that they know what inclusive behaviors are. And lastly, be prepared to apply the learning from the assessment and the education in a way that is sustainable throughout the life of the leader and the organization itself. And lastly, measure what matters. In this case, with regard to the kind of behaviors in the workplace that really matter, particularly among leaders, which is not only accepting the differences in people, but actually being able to go one level beyond that in a more active way to demonstrate curiosity about others. That's the receptive piece. Reflective, to be consciously aware of your personal bias. I gave you an example of my own as it relates to tattoos, for example. And being transparent in decision making, being prepared to talk about and reinforce that our decisions were made as leaders for reasons that are supportable and not based on cronyism or any other reason. And lastly, to inspire others around us, particularly, this is leadership behavior, to be more inclusive through our own actions. And when we are leaders in particular, to empower other team members to be the best that they can be. So these are three of the very, very critical areas to measure and to reinforce through both assessment as well as through education. So let's drill down a little bit further on that, because what I've just said kind of sounds a little bit elusive. So let's talk a little bit about those 3 R's in a way that hopefully will make this come to life. First, an inclusive behavior, an inclusive culture requires inclusive behavior, right? That's what we've been talking about. And then we mentioned on a very high level what those 3 R's are. The reason that we have chosen these 3 R's are based upon some very, very important criteria that I want to share with you. One is, as I said before, we have studies now, multiple studies from huge institutions that demonstrate what those behaviors are. But we have taken all of that data and all of that information about what inclusive behaviors are. And we have focused primarily on the intersection between inclusion behaviors and innovation behaviors. And I'll tell you very clearly and transparently why that is. Because when we were testing for just inclusion behaviors, as it relates to all of these studies that I've told you about, what we were getting from our clients in enterprise were some very nice leaders. We were able to move the needle on making these leaders nicer. But what was missing was the business benefit of that. And we ran with the hypothesis that if we could capture the intersection between inclusion behaviors and innovation behaviors, that we would get the leader that was not only a kind, caring, open individual, but a leader who could bring out innovation in his or her team, and therefore start moving the needle on important things like revenue, for example. And so that is the focus of our work, is that intersection. And what does that look like? I mentioned before, I said, it's not just being accepting. Okay, I'm okay with the fact that you're a woman. I'm okay with the fact that you're a person of color. I'm not going to hold any of your visible or even invisible aspects of diversity against you. That's fine. That's a good start. But actual curiosity associated with the differences is what brings out the best in people. So what that, the what of that, which is on the left-hand side of your screen, is, that means investing time to learn what matters most to other people, particularly people that are different from you. That means consistently seeking out different kinds of opinions on business issues that impact everyone. It means acknowledging those who speak up and offer new and different ideas, and even if that is just not the way things have been done in the past. But if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, and you may ask, okay, Denise, why are you going into this much detail? Because we need to help leaders understand, what does that look like? How do I show up, and what do I say? And so these examples on the right-hand side of your screen bring that to life. It's about asking open-ended questions and soliciting information and thanking people for thinking in different ways and seeking out more information, even if ultimately you have to say no to that particular idea. So that's the first part of the 3 R's. Reflective is being self-aware and transparent. So it's great to be aware of what your biases are, and to really try to interrupt that signal when and if it appears. But in addition to that, it's super important to be able to explain your decisions as honestly and transparently as possible whenever you can. Obviously, there are certain circumstances where senior leadership, for whatever reasons, legal reasons, strategic reasons, they just simply cannot give a lot of information. But for the most part, if the decisions that were made are backed up, and when, decisions about promotions, decisions about who got a high visibility assignment or an assignment that involved travel and therefore the possibility of advancement, making those decisions based on really sound business judgment and being able to explain that is critical. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see how this shows up in real life as an example. And when we go on into tools, I will just tell you now, when we are giving our trainings live, this shows up in a really real way through interactive exercises and through role playing and what have you. And our e-learning that was developed, same thing. It's all about being able to understand what this really looks like, not just these words in the sky, and being able to apply them on a consistent basis that makes the difference. And the last of the 3 R's, revitalizing, is being inspirational, related to inclusion by walking the talk, but also empowering your team to be the next leaders, the leaders of tomorrow. Every member of the leaders team in an organization should be groomed as a future leader and therefore empowered in a very consistent way, and not just 1 or 2 members of that team, but every member of that team. So Elizabeth, I'm going to stop again just to make sure that there aren't 1 or 2 questions, because we've gone a long time now without 1 or 2 questions. So I'll just open your mic and let me know if there are 1 or 2 that we should answer, just kind of give people a chance to reflect before we move on.
Sure. First question is, what are the biggest risk factors my company should consider when starting a culture transformation initiative?
Okay, that's a huge question, but I'll answer it briefly and succinctly, which is having your change agents lined up, having a strong change transformation strategy, some of which we have discussed, bringing comms, communications on board to make sure that the transformation is rolled out correctly and that there's consistent communication throughout. This is something that we're constantly helping our clients with from a consulting point of view. And being willing and open to engage in some way, shape, or form the naysayers, by really understanding that persona so that you can anticipate what the pushback is going to be. I know that that's difficult. It's difficult for all of us. And I'm not saying that we focus on that person or try to change that person, but engaging that person from the point of view of understanding so that we can be as prepared as possible for this journey is important. Elizabeth, maybe 1 more?
Sure. How does good culture become toxic?
Ooh. Well, I'm gonna just say that in terms of my experience, sometimes the founders of the organization, we're going way back, the initial values, the initial leaders at the helm, really the values were good, the leaders did walk the talk, and then over time, through the organic growth of that organization, or even through mergers and acquisitions growth, there is an infiltration of other cultures in the case of mergers and acquisitions, or other leaders that take the helm maybe even to turn around the organization from the point of view of, an organization that might be not moving ahead in terms of revenue to the extent that it should. And so that's kind of a turnaround CEO that then is so focused on those important business objectives that he or she forgets that the culture of an organization needs to be maintained, and therefore it starts going in another direction. I think that's the easiest way to answer that question. And I'm very, very willing, whoever asked that question, to engage in that discussion with a little bit more granularity, offline. Thank you, Elizabeth. And continue to send in your chats and your questions in real time, so that when we get to these stopping points, Elizabeth can read off the questions and the comments. Okay, so now that we set up the challenge, we've spoken about transformation methodology, let's talk about some of the solutions. And obviously the solutions that we're going to share are the ones that have worked for our journey with our enterprise clients, and truth be told, are based not only on our successes, which are many. For those of you who get the business case deck, you'll see at least 2 of the case studies that show that this is real. But learning from our mistakes, and then also the mistakes that have informed our success, those inform the strategy solutions that we bring to the table, in addition to the raw consulting that supports our clients. So let's start with evaluating your organization fearlessly and objectively and in a holistic manner, right? We have to be able to assess all areas of the organization. And we have something called an organizational inclusion index. And Elizabeth and other members of my team that are on this call, I hope you don't kill me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. For those of you who are on this call, if you are willing to answer the questions that are associated with our organizational inclusion index, that is usually usually what we're paid a lot of money to evaluate, I will have our team invest in you in terms of being able to give you feedback about these different areas and some of the solutions that you can come up with. And depending on where you're located, we can discuss that personally, or by phone, or by screen share. But that's an investment that I'm willing to make. I will say this: there's a lot of people on this call, and obviously, if we end up, with 100 people doing this, it may be difficult to be able to respond in real time. So I'm gonna, Elizabeth, don't kill me. I'm gonna say the first 10 people to either chat to you or contact us at info@leadinclusively.com. I will invest in you. And the reason why I'm saying this is not a short questionnaire. It is on a Likert scale, like strongly agree to strongly disagree, with comment boxes, but there are a lot of questions. And anyone who does actually fill it out, to me, is invested in their company's future. Okay, Elizabeth, don't even unmute, because I know you're going to potentially be mad at me, because it does involve a lot of work on the side of our team. But I think it's a worthy investment on both sides. So moving on from there, it's also important to measure leadership behaviors. So you may have your own leadership instrument, and that's fine. The one that we use in conjunction with our live learning and in conjunction with our learning management system, e-learning, is exactly what we spoke about earlier. It is an instrument, and by the way, this instrument, I have to say, is a very short one. It is literally takes no more than about 10 to 15 minutes for the leader. But the significant part of this is that every single question, and I put 3 up here to try to demonstrate this, every single question is a question that involves that intersection between inclusion and innovation. So look at the 3 examples up here. It's the blue part that talks about inclusion, and it is the green part that talks about innovation. So it's one thing to acknowledge those who speak up and offer ideas. That's the inclusion piece. And frankly, that's kind of easy to remember. Thank you for offering that idea. That's good. But when it's contrary to the historic ways of thinking, it makes it harder. So if your organization doesn't do things that way, has never done things that way, doesn't as a leader that you can't reinforce that, it's harder to acknowledge people simply because they've offered an idea. I deliberately pursue team members' ideas that create a positive impact. Is the innovation side of things awesome? But regardless of my relationship with any particular member of the team member, so I may be very close to or relate to one particular team member for one reason or another. They may be closer to my age. They may be my same gender, my same race. They may go to the same country club. They may you might have, children in the same schools, but being able to pursue team member ideas regardless of that affinity is what is that magical combination. So I think you get the idea here of what's being accomplished. And the thing that I absolutely love about this instrument is that we have been able to develop something that results in a findings and recommendations document, report, basically, an action plan for every leader that's customized based on their answer. And it happens when you push finish. So we've developed an algorithm so that there is an instantaneous automated result that the leader can use in real time. And that, by the way, is included in all of our programs. So if we are consulting with you, if we are doing live learning, if we are doing e-learning, you get this automatically. So no survey fatigue, no delay, and incredibly actionable. In terms of live workshops and executive roundtables, they run the gamut, right? Because this area shows up in many, many different ways. But in every single situation, our workshops and our executive roundtables can be customized for your priorities, for your events, for your organizational culture, for your leadership standards. That, to me, is what's important. We need to be able to embed everything into an organization for the way they need it. And so that necessarily results in sort of a collaboration between us and the people on this phone or your teams to make sure that your organization is getting what you need when you need it at the moment in the journey, in terms of developmentally where you are. But we also recognized that we need to be able to deliver learning in multiple different modalities. So in addition to live, in addition to virtual live, which is webinars, we finally took our core learning, not all of our learning, but our core learning, which is called From Unconscious Bias to Inclusive Behaviors. And we invested in ourselves and in our clients to develop a fully asynchronous e-learning that can be uploaded to our clients' learning management system or to ours with a login for our clients. And so everything that we do is now sustainable. And Elizabeth, should we very, very quickly do the next poll?
Sure. I have launched the poll. You'll have about a minute to vote, and then we'll view the results quickly and move on.
Sounds good to me. And I think I'm doing pretty well on timing. I hope I get some kudos from my team for that. We're going to get to the sustainability piece of this, by the way, in a minute. All right, should we close the poll?
Okay, we are closing the poll now. And everyone can see here that the results on the screen show that fully half of all of our attendees do not have a mechanism for sustaining inclusion culture, don't require leaders to take inclusive leadership training, or have a mechanism to assess inclusive leadership behaviors. So
Okay.
we have definitely got people on the line who could benefit from what we're talking about.
Yeah, and let's look at the cup half full too, which is 50% due. So that's really good. And hopefully, by the way, when it comes to for the 50% that did say, for example, that they do have inclusive behaviors learning. Hopefully, that's the second generation training that is not just raising the level of unconscious bias, but moving towards inclusive behaviors, which is sort of the next wave of our journey. Great, good to know both ways, and happy to help those who don't have something in place. All right, and any questions, or should I move on, Elizabeth, to the sustainable, the sustainability part of our webinar?
Let's go ahead and move on, and I will follow up personally with anyone else who submits questions, because we are getting close to the end of our time.
Okay, understood. So we talked about scaling culture, keeping it sticky and sustainable, and we're going to give you also a sneak peek as to what we're doing to make that happen, which is unbelievably exciting for us. It's the most exciting thing I've ever done in my career. So I'll share that with you kind of towards the end, just in a minute or two. Basically, actually, okay, I guess I'm sharing it with you now. So the one thing that I wanted to say is there are multiple different ways to do this, including just trying to keep inclusion top of mind in some way, shape, or form throughout the year. In other words, the critical part of this is not to think that a one-off training of some kind or one-off events is somehow going to reinforce the culture transformation or the learning on the part of the leader. The exciting thing that I'm sharing with you is that we are in development on an inclusion virtual coach app, which, by the way, we can demo for you, but just know that we have one of our clients is actually funding the entire development of this app in exchange to be first to market in their particular sector, which is the financial sector. So we can still take partners to be first to market in all the other sectors. And this is going to become available to the entire nation and the world, actually, within the next 6 months or so. But basically, we have designed what we're calling an inclusion virtual coach app, so that leaders can get nudge messaging and practice these inclusive behaviors that we've been talking about at the right time, all the time, based on their schedule. So to us, this is a dream come true, because we've been grappling with this issue all of our professional lives. And so leaders get to choose from 6 areas. A quick start, which is really kind of random acts of inclusion, hiring, team development, meetings, strategy, managing performance, and they can input the timing of when they receive these messages and get micro learning, so very quick bursts, which is how our leaders are consuming information to begin with, and in a way that is supported by neuroscience. So working with PhDs to make sure that the way they're getting information is associated with activating the brain as to why this is important, boom, learning experience, boom, and the opportunity to reflect as the critical triad of the reinforcement. So what does that mean in real life? You remember that I shared a day in the life of a leader. What it means is that they might receive a short article on how bias impacts hiring because that day they actually had an interview of sorts. They might get a tip for one of their meetings because they have a meeting schedule, so they have scheduled their nudge about meetings to hear the quieter voices in the meeting itself. Obviously, you understand that I'm accelerating this, day in the life just for purposes of demonstrating to you what we're trying to accomplish. Now the leader is actually at their interview and they're using ideas from that experience, and then they're sitting there even at their computer and they have a moment to reflect. They push the reflect button, they speak into their microphone to text and say, which is time stamped and the whole bit, and they're able to say, I was finally able to hear from Sally today. I'm so proud. I really need to reach out to her individually, or something to that effect. When it comes to the performance evaluations, they're in a position to do that objectively because they've had that cadence of information pushed to them, and so on and so on throughout the day. So we are no longer trying to make the leader fit into us. We are fitting into the leader. And that, I think, is so incredibly exciting. And we're happy to do a full demo on that for you, if that's something that actually all the tools that we have demos. They all have 4-minute video teasers. And most importantly, we just want to connect with you and be part of your journey from a consulting point of view. But I can't lie, I'm very excited about these digital tools. Elizabeth, I think we have time for just one last poll before I wrap up. So why don't you launch that super quick for those of you who can take it, that would be awesome. And then I'll just give you a little bit of wrap up, which is basically to tell you what you're going to receive as a result of being on this webinar, in addition to the business case deck. So we'll just take literally, we got a few minutes, so just literally less than a minute to weigh in on the third poll before our wrap up. And while you guys are taking that poll, I'm just going to thank you for being the thought leaders that you are. You are the reason we exist. You are the reason why we've basically taken our passion and turned it into reality. And we do believe, as I know you do, that we are going to be instrumental in making our organization's success and basically cultivating the workplace of tomorrow. So thank you. All right, Elizabeth, I think we're going to have to close up the poll so that I can tell people what they're going to be receiving and still get them out on time for their next meeting.
All right. In terms of results, it looks like we have a lot of consensus around the fact that leaders need more support, not just one more thing to do. It's 87% agreeing with that. And, and also that traditional learning is often not sticky. So we have 67% agreeing with that, and 46% agree that culture transformation is often not sustainable.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much for weighing in. All right, what you're going to be getting is the business case deck that I showed you before, which has not only the stats, but the actual citations so that you can look them up yourself, and so that you are empowered to do what you need to do your job and to get the kind of buy-in you need. A webinar recording, and Elizabeth, just mute your phone for a second so that
my apologies.
No worries at all. And you are going to get an invitation to our office hours. What that means is you can appear in listening mode, but you will also have a voice. You can ask any question you want and get an answer. You can hear what other diversity and inclusion professionals and leaders that are interested in this area and influencers who are in this area, because we have a lot of diversity and inclusion professionals that log in from actually all over the globe. So you'll get an invitation to that. You also will get those video teasers that I was telling you about, the 4-minute video teasers on the digital products. The full demos, by the way, take 30 minutes each, so we do those on request. And remember, I sort of, it's not formally here, but I offered, if you want the organizational inclusion index and you're willing to fill it out, my team is going to be instructed to analyze that for you and help you on your journey. So if anyone is able to stay on and wants to ask one last question, feel free. If not, please enjoy your day. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on this call, and I'll look forward to future webinars. You'll be getting an invite to the next webinar as well, of course. Elizabeth, anything further before we wrap up?
Not at this time. There's a couple questions that I'll follow up with individually.
Okay.
It looks like we've answered most of them at this point.
Nice. Okay, glad to hear it. Bye, everyone, and looking forward to getting to know you better. Please reach out on LinkedIn if you haven't already. I like to keep in contact with people who come to these webinars. Take care now, and thanks, Elizabeth, and other staff members that are on the line as well.